Hello, this is Max Drake. I want to carry on with the theme of what we've been doing here, which is trying to automate getting a whole lot of useful data and sending it to ourselves by email so that we've sort of got updated. So the first thing that I went into was actually just doing it in Ephemeris, and from that we used a library, which was a Python library called efem, and we asked it about the thing, and it came back daily giving the positions of the planets for the next 24 hours. And so we also wrote that data to a CSV file, and then we did a plot, and we used the data from the CSV file, so we used sort of static data but it had been generated somewhere else, to actually plot the planets onto there. We then went through and we did the moon phases and the sunrise and sunset phases, or when they are on a daily for the following month, because obviously the moon phases are going to work out on the 28 days cycle that it goes through. So we could just do it daily, but to a certain extent, why not extend out at this point in time? And then we were actually doing the setting up of the PDF pages that we were actually automating and doing. For this one, again, we used the efem library. There were a couple of other libraries that we could use, and we started off using one and we ended up with that one there just from a convenience point of view. And then we went into the tides down at the local place where I do the tides, and we generated that data from an API. So basically we got the information out of a database somewhere, and we said, right, we'll actually build a table on that, and we'll build the chart onto there, and then we combined all of those together and sent it via an email that we got automated so that it actually happens once a day. So that was really in the first video. I think I talked about that. So the next thing that I want to do is just to follow on. I want to do a little bit more playing with the little tables from the PDF point of view. And the other thing that I want to do is I want to try and get data from a different method. So the method that I want to use is to look at web scraping. Now there's two ways that you can web scrape. You can come in from the front end, and you can claw and get your information through there, and I'll give an example of that. Although personally I've played with web scraping in the past, and I actually haven't been that successful, and I've sort of got fed up. I find it fiddly, and I don't seem to be able to get the information reasonably smoothly. Now we'll go to this site here to get the information, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the information from this part of the table. So this will be giving us the rainfall hourly, it's going to give us the temperature hourly, and then we're going to get the wind speed and the wind direction. So I just want to just quickly talk about web pages. Now you can get static web pages and you can have dynamic web pages. Now static web pages, it's like if you just got one file and you just wrote some HTML code and it's on that file. So every time you would go to open that, it just calls that file, which is called index.html, and it opens it and all the data's in there. Or you can actually have a dynamic web page. So a dynamic web page suddenly says, well, this data is going to have no relevance tomorrow because it's all to do with Saturday. So on Sunday, who knows what the weather's going to be? It's not going to be the same. So that data is not static. It needs to change. So what it does is it goes to a database somewhere, and that database could be connected to somewhere that's doing forecasting algorithms to actually calculate what the weather's going to be like and what the temperature's going to be like, and also from maybe sensors as to what historically those temperatures ended up being, and the weather conditions and the rainfall and what actually happened. So we've got a forecast of this is what we think is going to happen, and then we've got the on this one here, observed, that's what actually happened. And just an indicator on this one, if it's forecast, it's just done to an integer. If it's observed, that's what the sensor up at the weather station in Kelvin actually told us it is. So this is what was actually done. So that's changing all the time. So how do you know which is which? So one of the things that you can do is that you can just come to any point on your web page in the background, right hand click and say view page source. Let's see if it's going to sulk on me. So if we come down here and we start looking at we want to try and get that table data wherever it is. this starts looking like the table data. Now if we look at something like the table data at the very top, we got Asia, we got Southern Asia, and we got these tags. So this is a TH, which is a table header, then TR, which is a row, then TD, which I think is a cell, and then we got information through this. So if we go back to the other one, this information is actually embedded in the page straight away. Now if I come to this one here, go into the background, right hand click and look at a view page source, and we look into here, see it's actually quite a short page. It only goes to 199 lines, and yet look at how much information's on this thing, and that isn't 199 lines of data. So what this says, this one here is it has a template, and then it has this JavaScript that fills it up from a database and stuff like that. So this is a dynamic web page, but to a certain extent it's obvious because it's forever changing. The weather, every time you look on this, something's going to change onto it in a way. Whereas this one, the population by country, this is on a specific date, so they can actually have this data static. So you take different approaches if it's a static web page to if it's a dynamic web page, because and to a certain extent it's how the page is generated. If this is static page, you can actually just use a JSON request. So let me just see if I've got one somewhere here. JSON request. Oh, sorry, I've been messing with this a bit, so I can't recollect where that one is now. Is that one's? Okay, this one here, I can use requests. So this is basically a request, and I'm using BeautifulSoup as the library here. And if I just run this one through here, it's going in and it's looking for the table, and it's saying give me all of the rows, and it's writing it out. So if we actually just go to this 3 wiki text, it's given me all the row data through there. So I've still got all of the tags and the things like that in, but I've been able to scrape the web directly, and what I've been targeting is I've been using CSS selectors to get it. We'll talk about them in a thing. This is not a lesson on this, it's just a lesson on we can do this sort of thing. So you've got to do your own learning on this particular area. And generally, I'm not a great fan of this because I cock it up. So it's rather my lack of ability in this sort of a thing. So when I first started in here, I sort of jumped in and I said, cool, I'm going to start using all of these things I've been hearing about. So I started to use, everybody kind of says, oh, well, you use Selenium and you use BeautifulSoup to actually do this web scraping for dynamic pages. So that's what I actually typed in. If I'm going to do dynamic pages, let's go and do some dynamic pages. So what we end up doing is we're going to try getting this stuff from the front end through here. So what I want is that I want this element here. So I'm just going to select that element there and then just right hand click on it and go inspect the element. And it comes in and is it going to give it to me? Get in there. No, let's just do an expand all. So you see there's an awful lot of script in here. So the other one where we just said, you know, show us this, it's got 195 lines on there. There's nothing in there at the time of if we just look at it without it being refreshed. Sorry, so I can go back to here again. So in here, if we wanted one of these elements through here, and we just right hand click on the mouse and we go inspect the element, and hopefully it'll find. Why is this? I think my RAM is doing its nutting. So if we do that, here we are, and it's come through in part of this big table area, but it's got it in spans to actually show me where that element is. So I'll just go and find it again. Here it is through there. Now what I can do is I can target that element specifically, and I can say tell me what the inner HTML is. So we got some HTML tags, and the tags are paragraph tags, and inside the paragraph tag there's a little 0. You know, it's I'm not trying to, and it's also got a class. But what I can actually do is that I can actually just go in there and say, give me the inner HTML, and if I just paste it in at this point here, Control V, you'll see the little 0 comes out, because that's what was sitting into there. Let's see if I can, it doesn't really matter. I'll find something a bit more interesting text. But what you can go in is, you can go in and you can select by a CSS selector, or you can select by an XPath or a CSS path. So let's just look at an XPath through here. So what an XPath does, it says, well, okay, then if I come in at the top of the page, how do I navigate down to that specific element to get the data from that? So if we, I've been moving things around here. So if we look at that, this is the XPath to actually find that particular element on the page. So you've got to go to the HTML, which is the actual page itself. Then you've got to go into the body, because normally on a HTML page you've got a header part, and then you've got a body part. Then we go into the main, we go div, and all of these ones here, and then we finally get down to this P class here, and we can then say, right, that's the element that we want to look at. Now return me the inner HTML of that point. So because this is a dynamic web page, what we've got to do is we've got to go on, and just from the point of view of if we just look at the elements of a web page through here, you've got your document type, which is HTML. You've then got your head, and if we go through your head, a lot of that's to do with getting your styles and all of those sorts of things. And if you've got favicons, or you've got little images and things like that for little icons in the thing, you start calling all of that data up there. There is a couple of scripts here, but generally your scripts, you then got your HTML coming through, and a lot of the times you end up with your scripts down at the bottom. So once you've actually loaded up your page, you can then bring your other data in, and it's just overlaid as to where it wants to do. So one sets up the page, and then you have your JavaScript. So your styles are really your CSS to make things pretty. What's text, and you know, is it left to the left, is there padding and whatever through there. You've got your HTML, which is your tags of where it is. Is it an HTML1 tag, so it's a big number, or is it a this or that or the other? So and then at the end you've got your JavaScript coming in, actually doing your events and stuff. And this point of view is grabbing data from the database and it's putting it in specific places. It says if you get this piece here, go and put it in where it's in this class and in this sort of stuff. So knowing that sort of stuff, you know, it's a dark art all in itself as far as I'm concerned. Like there's so much to it, and I just get a bit befuddled. And I'm suddenly thinking, no, I'm more interested in the content rather than builds and stuff, because it's one of those things that for me it just consumes all my time. So we can target the front end. So how would we do that? Well, one of the ways we can do that is that we can use this Selenium. So if we just go in and just type Selenium, and the Selenium is a driver that will go through, is a web driver. If you want to, primarily it's for automating web applications for testing purposes, and people use it to actually go and get information off a website, and it's an automated. So what it actually means, I'm going to, is that it can automate a web scrape. Now it is a little bit fiddly to set up. You've got to do, it's got to have a web driver, and the web driver has got to be based on what browser you're using. I'm using Firefox. Most people use Chrome, and they've got little setup things of what you've got to do. Basically, you pip install Selenium, but you've then got to go and get a web driver from somewhere, install that on your computer, and then you've got a path to that, so it's got a solid path to that. And for Firefox, you don't point at the path of the driver, which is a Gecko driver, you path to Firefox in the way that it works. Now it can also work headless and not headless, and at this point in time we're going to isolate this. So what headless, we'll do it, we just do the example of this one, and I think they're going to break, so it doesn't really matter. But watch what happens here. So in this one, we're using the WebDriver, and we've got the Selenium, which actually goes and makes a request. And this is what it's requesting. It's requesting these 2 bits of HTML XPath tags, XPath information. So the driver goes and gets that URL, and the driver finds the elements by the XPath, so we're using a specific method. And then we're going to use BeautifulSoup, which is another library, to process the HTML so that we can return the inner HTML of those elements that we've gone through and reached through. So I'm going to run this one now, and then it's supposed to bring them back and do it, and I think it breaks quite nicely. But just see what happens through here. So I'm running this here. So it then goes off and gets my Selenium WebDriver. It opens up a browser all on its own. And this particular site does something quite interesting through here. It's trying to do something, but what it does is it blocks it. It says if it's coming through Selenium, put these ads up there, and it actually stops it from getting the information that we want. So it's not able to return the data and scrape. So I've just got to close it down because it's not working. So there's a blocking through here. Now you can make the thing headless through here, and if it's headless, what that means is you don't see it open. It all happens in the background, but I did notice that it's very, very slow. So I spent quite a lot of time trying to play with these, and I suddenly thought, oh, I've got these tags wrong, or I've got my XPath wrong. I'm not getting the things I was trying to do it on very simple things. Most of them I was doing headless, so I wasn't realizing that in fact it was being blocked along the way. And a lot of websites will do this. They're suddenly saying, well, we'll show you the data, but we don't want you harvesting our data so that you can on-sell it to somebody else. We actually just want you to consume it by just opening up the web page and doing it that way. And the other thing that we can do is that we can start selling your data to all these different people as well. So this is coming in the front end. So we actually say, here's my web page. What have I got on there? I want to grab those elements. So that's what I was doing. I ended up with a lot of difficulty with that. So I ended up not being very happy, and I came across this chap here, John Watson Rooney, and he's got an awful lot of things of different web scraping methods and all of this, and he walks through a whole lot of them. But this one to me was absolutely brilliant, and I've got a link in this in the text below the video that I'm doing. And it's basically, I followed this exercise for this particular website, and it worked perfectly. He said, instead of going through the front end, oh, here's something actually I just want to pause and just highlight through the front end. So we're looking to actually find these elements and scrape them. Now look at this one here. Now this to me is something that we want. So I'm going to actually inspect this element here. And when we inspect this element, what it comes through is as a canvas. Now if I just come into here and I just go image data URL, what this thing here has is this. It's not a lot of text. It's actually one big PNG image file. So it's got this spark line showing the temperatures rising up as it's going through, but all of the text is actually inside the image. So I can't access that. I've got to use some sort of method to go and get the data out of there. So they've made that very, very difficult to scrape. And they've done it with one element on their web page, and one thing that you most probably going to use most of all, which is the temperature when you're actually trying to get the weather data. So if you tried scraping this from the front end, oopsie, I can get rainfall, I can get the wind speed and the wind direction, but all I get is just an image of what that is. So I can't actually get a single element of each temperature at a specific time. So that's a bit of a shame, and I was actually so intrigued by that, I actually went in to try to get that working, and it was just really just something I hadn't come across. So websites do a lot of things to actually stop and make it very inconvenient for people to come through and scrape their websites easily. So based on that, inside this gentleman's video through here, and basically I followed all of the steps that he's got through here, is he says, if it's easier, go and do the back end. So don't try and get the data from the front end of the web page, because that can be difficult. And in this case, trying to get that image and get the data out of there is, instead, go to your network tab. So in here, sorry, I don't know if I'd mentioned that on this one here, you can go into more tools, and it actually said web developer tools, or you can just use Control-Shift-C or Control-Shift-I, I think. Well, Control-Shift-I, I think, for Firefox, but Control-Shift-E also works. So when we've got the developer tools through here, we go into the network one, and we go to HXHR, and then we refresh the page. And when we do that, as we refresh the page, we're getting all this GET requests. And if you see, we're getting a whole lot of JSON data and things. So if we just click on one of these, I'll just click on this one here because it's in plain. And we're just going to grab that GET request through there and go copy and just go V, paste. And this gives me some information that it's got on there. So it's brought that up, and it's suddenly saying I'm going to go and apply that somewhere on the website. So I don't need that one there anymore. So if we just go back into there again, what we can do is that we can look at the sort of content that's coming through. Now there's a lot of these that the sizes of the information is not that great. There's some XGUI ones or XURLs, not too sure, but there's a lot of JSON data here. Now I'm actually just going to skip to the plot, and I know it's this one here, which has got 11.75 or 47 kilobytes. So it's got a lot of data in it anyway. So if we actually just go and click on that one, oops, you'll see the information that we get out here. So if we just go into the raw data, suddenly we got an awful lot of data, and right in the middle here, if I just zoom in on that, you'll see we've got the date, the rainfall per hour, the rainfall, the temperature, the wind speed and direction. So that's what we want. And so instead of trying to scrape it from the front end, we can actually just take that URL there and just use a simple request to get that data through. So that's what I did instead. So we've actually got to come up to here. So in this first one here, I just get that request of use the GET request through there. Oh, sorry, one other thing I need to do on here. Oh no, I've got it open. Is that I just do a GET request. Now I'm using Postman here. I think he uses Insomnia. And the reason I use Postman is I don't use it that often. And I did have it loaded up on my computer, and then you've got to kind of update it as all of the things go. And I thought, no, I'll just use the online version because it's a lot easier, and I don't use it that frequently. So, so if we just close that out, don't save, we can do a new, and we're going to do a GET request, a HTTP request through there, and we're just going to paste that bit of information in through there, and we're going to go send. Now, a lovely thing about Postman and also Insomnia is that's not the one I want. It's not giving me that much data. So let's just go back to our website through there, and that was the one I wanted. Oops, that's the one I want. So let's go back into Postman. Now the reason we're going into Postman is because we can download all of the whole of this JSON file, which goes through for about 3,000 lines, but we only want a bit of the information. We only want the bit with our weather. Oh, sorry, this is all Kerry Airport, and there's a whole load of other things through here. We only want stuff around 600, I think it is, so I'm going to come up a bit. We want this information through here. So how do we access only that part of the JSON file? So what we can actually do is that we can just go through and just start going through the tabs and seeing which ones we want. Now you see here this says line 142. Now if I click on that one, suddenly it goes from 142 to 276. So it says this is a deeper path, and there's a lot of data inside this deeper path. So we can go to the last, and that only goes to 51, so that's fine. Then there's navigation, that's fine. Then if I do primary, suddenly I go from 181 up to 1,466. So my data's inside there. I'm actually just going to jump ahead. But this is the method that he uses, so you can follow on with his video. We come down here, we get to the main, we get to the modules, we don't need days, we don't need things, and we get to the graph one here, which is where the data is, so we come through. So we've now got, so if we go into the JSON file, we can say, okay, then go into the layout, which is at the top head, then go in, so we can write this script, data, it fetches the, data one just gets the response from our request. So we've made our request to this site, and we're going to do a get request, and we're going to return, there's no payloads or headers or anything like that, so we just get the response, and we're going to call it data one, and then we go into the first one, which is the layout, primary, slots, main, modules. It's the second module one. So if I actually just go, I could actually just run this out here. So if I actually just go into data two, and if I just go print data two, and let's just go to modules 0, and then we just run those out and go and run that. It's returning stuff, but it's not really what we want. So if we go back and go response 1, so to a certain extent you've just got to sort of test it and suck it and see. That's not really giving me what I want. So if we go into number 3 and number 2, because it's and run that one, suddenly you can start seeing we're getting the content that we want, but we're also getting some other stuff at the end. So this is where we've got to go down these extra levels to get only the information that we want. So this is really just calling down the whole JSON, but it's filtering out everything else. So we only get the stuff that we want, and then we can actually write it out to a file. Now I've written it out to a file on here, although you've got the URL so that you can do it yourself when I've done the codes. But I've just written it out so you've got the JSON and you can play with next. So as soon as I've actually got that into the JSON format, I then bring it into a data frame. So if we look at the data frame as to what's come through, we've got the date, we've got the rainfall per hour, rainfall, temperature, but our wind is still concatenated into this one sub one through here that's got the direction and the speed. So we need to break that out. So I asked Mr. Bing to write me a little script to break those out. And so it says take the wind direction column and, the wind one here, call one wind direction, and then use this lambda function to actually pull that out through there. And it did that. So because I didn't want that wind column at the end, and then I also wanted to get the date, I wanted the day name of the date, and then I also wanted the date hour and the date day, because I wanted to do my table by date. So I actually just had a date of each one and then hourly work come through. So anyway, we ended up with the CSV. Where's my CSV through there? We ended up with a CSV that has this. So each day, Saturday here, which is actually working from, we go through from hour 1 through to hour 23, or it should be 0. Oh, I remember 1 through to 20. I think it counts in a different way. Anyway, it goes through. This one starts at 0 and goes through to 23, and this one starts from 0 and goes through. Now this one has just to explain a little bit on this table that it's got here. This has 48 hours of data from where you are. So if we're at 4 p.m. here, then it's 48 hours from there forward. So it's not 2 days worth, it's 2 days worth forward, and then it's also got the residual down behind it on the page before. but this, when we're doing it, we're grabbing it from this point forward. So really, we can generate the whole stuff from the word go. So we've used this so that we can follow the lines to see where we're getting our data. So we've got the mains, then we've got the modules, then we've got the graph, then we've got the columns, and then we start, it just iterates through and gets all of those things after the next ones. We put that into a data frame, we've taken the data frame, we pushed it into a CSV, because again, I like to do an API call or a GET request or whatever. Then I want the data, and then I'll process the data in the second script through there. So the second script that we actually just do is to get into this one here, which is, and I just run that one. Oh, it's happened. That I'll just delete that, delete, and I just run that through there. And this one is really just doing the PDF. And it hasn't, has it done it? Let's just see. No, it hasn't. I think I actually had a pause in there. Oh, because I'm not running. Where's my... That's the one I should be running. Excuse me. Being a bit daft there. Oh, sorry, and it's dropped it through. So in the end, I've got this, and if we just zoom out of here. So from when it was generated, we got 48 hours forward. So we've got 2 days plus a bit more, depending on when the things run. So on this, when I was looking at the table, so I've just got each table, so I've got the date and the day and the date of the table, and then I've got each hour coming through there, then I've got the temperature, I've got the rainfall, and rainfall for hour. I think the rainfall is what they predict, forecast, and the rainfall for hour is what's actually there. So, but I think they sort of ended up bit thing. So I think they meant to kind of only show those on one and show these on the other, but they've got them both mixed up. So, and then we got the wind direction and the wind speed through there. So it's a bit plain. I could start putting emojis or things into here to start giving the graphics a little bit more. The process was rather, and on this one here, I ended up using zebra row stripes rather than column stripes, which I actually did on the tides one. The other thing that I just want to draw your attention to is I was having problems on some of the early ones of these. I wonder if I've got any there of the early ones. No, I haven't. Maybe. Oh, let's see if I run this one here. And I think it writes out to the same file, so it might. Yeah, so when I wrote this out to begin with, I should actually change the name, this was sending it to an A4, and you see that it was doing a day, and it chopped the next one off halfway through. Now, when we looked at it close up, you know, these were far too big, so I wanted to squeeze the columns to make them narrower, and I think I reduced the text size a bit, and then I also reduced the height to try and get 2 days onto one and reduce the gap in between this. So for this, again, I just use Bing just to tidy up all the time. But the one thing as a variance from the previous video, which is what I'd done on this, is I did 2 things. First of all, I tried using this setting margins. I'll just close that. Setting margins, and when I set margins, because I've got no, I ran across a problem. If I use this orientation in the last video when I was doing the tide tables, if I use this to get to actually set the origin and to set the A4 format or whatever, and if I set it to landscape or something like that, if I had any Unicode in there, it didn't like using this other ones. It actually just did it. So I actually said, okay, I want to set the margins because I've squeezed the columns, and the columns only come up to about 120 wide. 120 millimeters wide on the page, and an A4 page is 210. So it sort of rattled off on half the page. It's kind of looked a little bit empty. So I suddenly said, well, okay, then I wanted to set the margins. And the thing which I found on here, you could set the left-hand margin, you could set the right-hand margin, you could set the head, but you couldn't set the bottom. So I thought, and whenever I set the margins, if I just go and do this, I'm going to run the set margins through here and see what actually happens. And so you end up doing it ended up being a little bit fluffy with this, as you'll see with this margins here. Some of them are set out from this point here, so they're askew, and these are the ones that are shaded. And so I could have got into a whole lot of fiddling and stuff with that. But what I ended up deciding to do was I said, okay, then we're not going to explore the margins too much at this point in time. But what we're going to do is that we're going to make the page, instead of a standard A4 page, which is 210 millimeters by 297 millimeters high, 210 wide, I'm going to make it 150 wide, and I'm going to make it 310 high, and then I can actually fit both tables in on a single page. And then I can actually only suddenly saying, I don't need to have, I can actually just say, give me 2 days worth, I only count up to 24 or 23 twice and then stop, don't give me any more data after that. Because to a certain extent, I'm doing it daily, so I've got today's and I've got tomorrow's, and it's only given me a half a day. So in their weather forecast here on this particular page, this is the next 48 hours, there's a 7 days and there's an extended days as well. So I was just suddenly saying, well, from my point of view, my table, I can do that. The fact that the page size is a bit strange is something mentally I was sort of thinking, I'm so used to actually working in offices where you've got the photocopy and you've got A4 sheets or A3 sheets or whatever, so you're always working to those set formats. But if you're only actually looking at it online and you're never going to be printing it, who cares what size the page is? So, I could go and do a lot more effort, but the fact that I can actually just alter the page size as to what I want, I thought was quite an interesting thing. So I spent a lot of time now, with the previous one when I was doing that, I ended up having a class for creating this, the formatting for the PDF table. In this one, I decided not to go with the class, so I said, Bing, don't make me a class. This is, I want to use the fpdf2 library, and can you please make me a table that does this, and I want this happening, and I want that happening, and stuff like that, and just iterated through there until I got what I wanted. So, and I was doing a couple of adjustments up here for something like the height of some of the cells and the things like that, so that I could tweak them to see what I was comfortable with. So at the end, it's another piece of data. We've decided to use web scraping of a sort, although really at the end of the day, we're using that website and we're basically just doing another API call because we're just doing a call and we're getting back JSON formatting that we're then just formatting again. And to me, that is so much easier than doing the front end web scraping, which can be quite painful because there's not really that many static web pages out there, which was the list of countries, the Wikipedia type things, which is pretty much static. There is a third version of static web pages in a way, and what they're called Jamstacks, because one of the things you find is if you've got a dynamic web page, especially on mobile devices, they can be quite slow to load because they have to go and fetch a lot more information rather than just what's on the page. So they generate and then they've got to do this. So once they bring in the information, they've got to run the JavaScript scripts to actually put everything where it needs to and then render the page. So they've been doing this thing called Jamstack where and things like Hugo and Gatsby are examples of those sorts of web pages where they go through, they create the web pages by getting the API calls, and they end up with a whole load of static pages. So, because they load so much faster, because what they've actually found, people are going in and doing retail sort of stuff and things like that, and they're doing it on their mobile. If it takes too long, they get bored and they just go to a different site. They suddenly think, it's too much hassle. I might do that in the office, and then they forget to do it because their Wi-Fi mobile. So they've actually found that if they use those methods of doing it, that they can speed it up. But generally, like even my WordPress sites are all they're dynamic sites. They store all of the stuff in a database and they just pull it up as needed. They actually build the pages inside the WordPress thing. So at the end of the day, I ended up using a backend method to get the data from this particular site to actually display it. But I just really want to say there are other sources of data, rather than if you haven't got an API for something, maybe suddenly saying, well, I can get it from this web page and stuff. Most of my data generally comes like historical stuff, or I'm trying to get a big data set. I go for something like Stats New Zealand Online. Now they have an API that they got a certain data set that you can actually access through there, but for something like big data sets, a lot of the times you set up and you make a request and it sends back a big Excel file or CSV file that you then just break down and consume as to what you do. So when you're looking at your data, that is another method that you can actually go to get it. Again, I think I pretty much got the last thing on here. A couple of things I just want to mention in closing. I go out at night. I actually find now I have these in my hand. I go out at night and as I'm walking the dog, and I suddenly think, oh, there's the moon, and I'm checking it against this thing here, and in fact, it's not reading correctly. The moon is not in the correct location to where it's supposed to be. Now, it's only sort of coming into, it's kind of late autumn, coming into winter, so it's getting dark earlier, so I can start doing a bit of checking with this, and checking my timetables here and validating some of these things. I need to do some more, but it's really just the processes of, these are the processes that I've taken. I can point to where I've done things and how I've actually done things. The script is there, the code's there for other people to actually just take and manipulate and explore and do. I think possibly this eFem library is not as accurate as to what I want. I most probably will go and revisit all of these ones personally, because I'm not that happy with them. They're fine as a first crack, and they're useful for what they are. And in fact, this one here I found useful for going out, and I've now got a little mobile app on my that will do the compass. So I've got that up and ready to go, so when I go out in the evening I can check the north and things like that to see where the planets are in relation to that. And then I want a little altimeter, but I think that's called a meter or something. So I want to get one of those to be able to point at the planet based on the horizon to see what angle it is, so I can actually get the azimuth and the altitude as well, and see. One of the things which I have found with this is that I maybe need to make it a bigger image, so instead of actually doing it for an A4, I might need to do it for an A3 so that I can see if I can get some of this text to move apart. So I may have to joggle the text locations on them to make it more readable, because I do sometimes find in here trying to figure out which one's the moon hour. It is slightly offset, so maybe I need to offset a bit more, and maybe just offset to initially to make something like the moon very clear. Doesn't matter if the other ones are stuff, and to check one planet off at a time. Now I could just do this and revalidate again with Selenium, but it's nice to actually go out and physically do your own validation in a way. I have some data. Does that reflect what's actually happening in the world at this point in time? So it sort of makes it all a bit more real than if you're just doing it a little bit abstract on computers. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found that useful. If you like it, please give a thumbs up. If not, then don't give a thumbs up. Thank you.